Please welcome to the stage Lynn Mahoney, President of San Francisco State University and member of the Bay Area Council Board of Directors.
Good afternoon. I'm Lynn Mahoney, President of San Francisco State, and it's my privilege to introduce our extraordinary panel. Today, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment for higher education here in California and across the U.S. Our universities, engines of innovation, economic mobility, and democratic ideals, face unprecedented challenges and opportunities. The Bay Area is an exemplar of the range of opportunities higher education affords a region. As the site of premier research universities, like the two we'll talk to today, Stanford and Cal, to institutions like my own, which ranks 8th nationally for the social mobility of our primarily low-income first-generation student body. However different our missions may be, we are all watching with great concern as trust in higher education continues to wane, as federal funding for higher education declines, and as budget constraints grow, all while the expectations that students and their families and society have of higher education expands. The very mission of our universities is being questioned, even as their contributions to society and the economy remain as indispensable as ever. The evidence of our university's impact on the Bay Area innovation economy is profound and measurable. The universities we'll hear from today have had transformative impacts regionally and globally. I think the program describes them as the best on the planet. Stanford alumni alone have founded 18,000 California-based companies, employing over 3 million people and generating more than $1 trillion in annual revenues. The UC system has developed more than 12,000 active patents and launched startups that have transformed industries from biotechnology to clean energy. Chancellor Lyons comes to UC Berkeley's leadership with a fresh vision forged in his experience heading the Haas School of Business and serving as Berkeley's Chief Innovation Officer. He brings entrepreneurial thinking to address Berkeley's challenges while staying true to its public mission during a time of funding uncertainty. President Jonathan Levin guides Stanford with an unwavering commitment to academic freedom and excellence, recently expanding undergraduate access while defending research funding against significant federal cuts. His leadership emphasizes both excellence and civic responsibility during these contentious times. Moderating this important conversation is Janet Reilly, chair of the University of California Board of Regents, whose thoughtful governance has helped steer the UC system through both fiscal and philosophical storms. The Bay Area's future depends on the continued excellence and accessibility of all of our universities. Today's conversation will explore how these institutions navigate current challenges while fulfilling their essential missions, fostering discovery, expanding opportunity, and serving as anchors of innovation in our region and the globe. We need their leadership now more than ever. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Lyons, President Levin, and Chair Reilly.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Lynn. And let's give Lynn a round of applause for all that she does leading a fantastic university. You know, the title of this segment that we're doing this afternoon is Upheaval in American Universities. And I think that that is a very appropriate title. I can tell you that there is a lot of anxiety and uncertainties on our campuses across the country. You probably saw over the weekend that President Trump has asked his agencies to revoke the contracts, about $100 million worth of federal contracts from Harvard. So this is just the latest in the fight between Harvard and the administration. So against that background, Chancellor Lyons, thank you for being here, and President Levin, thank you so much. So let's just talk, first of all, let's take a broad view. Stanford and Cal, two of the greatest public and private institutions of higher learning and research on the planet, as Lynn said. So against the background that we're seeing right now, what are your top priorities for your respective universities, let's say over the next 5 years? And Jonathan, I'll start with you.
Great. So it's, first of all, thanks for having me, and great to get to do it with Rich. We were business school deans together before becoming presidents together, and so it's always a pleasure to do things with him. By the way, we are now co-directors of the Atlantic Coast Conference, which is where we respectively play football nowadays. So now when we meet in Charlotte, North Carolina. I kid you not, actually. That's 2025 for universities.
That could be a whole nother panel, college athletics.
That's a different day, exactly. So, well, actually, let me start. I started in this role in August, and of course, it was a different time. But when I started in this role, I was thinking about, what is it that is distinctive about Stanford in the world today, and what are the opportunities in front of it? And actually, I think there has a lot of overlap, I suspect, with probably what Rich was thinking about at Berkeley. And I thought, Stanford to me has all of the best features of the American frontier of California. The openness, the sense of opportunity and possibility, the optimism. And when I started in this role, I said I had 3 aspirations for Stanford going forward. I wanted the university to be open-minded. That is, open to the broadest range of inquiry and discussion and curiosity. I wanted to be open to new ideas, and that we were poised on the brink of an incredible period of discovery, fueled by data and algorithms. And I wanted us to be open to having a more expansive educational vision and educating more people at Stanford. And actually, the world has changed a lot in the 9 or 10 months that have gone by since then, but I still believe those are important, critical opportunities for the university and things we should be achieving. I think we now have layer on top of that a sort of pressing and urgent task, which is Stanford and peer institutions, Cal, everyone, all of our universities, has a work ahead of us to rebuild the partnership with the federal government and to restore a sense of broad-based trust and support in the American public. And we have to do that with urgency, but also with understand that may take us some years, and we absolutely have to do it, because to be successful, not just in 6 months, but in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we have to have the broad support of the American people.
Rich?
Thank you, Chair Reilly, and thanks to all of you for being here. And to John, we do go way back. Our fields are very similar as well. In any event, the 2 of society's most valuable assets, Stanford and Cal, there's just no 2 ways about that. And to what use shall we put them over the next 10 years? That's what's at stake. That's how important this is. There's no question about that, right? So there are many elements of that. I like starting with a kind of mission statement. If you said, what is our mission? Our mission is to produce as much societal benefit as we can through excellent teaching, research, and public service. That's a simple 10-word phrasing of our mission. And if you said, well, what are some of the most pressing opportunities that we face as a society? I think there are at least 3 revolutions that we all talk about and hear about and read about. There's a bio-revolution going on. Really, the clock speed on biology is we wouldn't have expected it. And thinking about AI as a revolution and thinking about climate as a revolution. And then there's a sort of lower frequency substrate to all of that, which is the kind of fracturing that we see in our society, whether it's income and wealth inequality or opportunity inequality, if you prefer that phrase. And so that's not just about democracy and so forth. It's really a fracturing that we see in a lot. Borders are contested in ways we would never have forecast 10 years ago, right? So those are some of the things to which we must put these assets, right? And how do we reorganize these assets to make us even better at addressing some of those pressing opportunities? That's part of the way I think about it.
Much of the Bay Area's economic dynamism and innovation have deep, deep roots in both of your universities. How do you see Stanford and Berkeley really driving economic opportunity and national competitiveness over the next few years?
I can start I think actually that touches on the federal partnership that I raised a minute ago. If you go back to the period after World War II, Stanford was a good regional university. After World War II, the federal government decided that as a national science strategy, it would invest in basic research in universities, merit-based competition to fund it. And the folks who were running Stanford at that time, like the folks who were running Berkeley, were visionary. They saw that was going to be an opportunity to become a great national university, and we did. And we brought the medical school down from San Francisco. We put a national lab on the Stanford campus, and we built an incredible engineering, biomedical sciences, across the board excellence in the sciences and in technology. And that's just been, first of all, a huge asset to the country in terms of discovery. But then we took it one step further, which was to recognize that universities, and Stanford and Cal are foremost among all of our universities, I think, in this dimension, that you could actually push ideas out of the university through entrepreneurship and create companies. And so if you look at what has been created in this area, I mean, the creation of Silicon Valley, NVIDIA, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Genentech, I mean, just the list is incredibly long, and the benefits that has created, starting with federal funding of basic science through great faculty research out into entrepreneurship and then scaled by business, is extraordinary, and it's an incredible asset to to this area, but also to the country.
Rich?
Yeah, I'll double underscore that. Tesla was Berkeley founded. OpenAI, some Berkeley co-founders. Apple, of course, Wozniak. I mean, the nation does look to this area, and part of what people have been trying to ask, because most geographic regions in the world have tried to replicate this, and they haven't been able to, and that's a perennial question. How would you do that? But there are elements of what's present at Stanford and at Cal that really are cultural, right? This, for example, one of the things that we've been working on is a new curriculum. I talked a little bit about the pressing opportunities, and most of those were research-based. But if you thought also about what percentage of our graduates would benefit from thinking more entrepreneurially, most people answer 100% to that question. Now, if you say, well, we're going to stand up 5 more sections of entrepreneurship, well, not every student will self-select into that class. So how do you get people into that mindset? There's got to be a better way to do this. Not necessarily just in the private sector, also in the civic sector or the public sector. So I think that's part of what we're doing. Is there's a gestalt, there's a way of being. There's got to be a better way to do this, and I want to be part of it. How do we enable our students to have a sense of agency that they can bring to the world? I think these are 2 great universities at that, and this is a great region at that, and that's very, very hard to replicate elsewhere.
And we certainly want to keep that going. So let's talk about some of the executive orders and some of the actions that are coming from the White House right now, particularly around the decrease in funds around indirect costs for research, some of the projects that are being halted, some of the grants that are being canceled. What kind of impact are you seeing on your research capabilities? And what kind of impact may that have on society? And Rich, I'll ask you to go first.
Well, thanks. There's so many elements to this. The so-called facilities and administration or indirect costs, and then some of the things that some termination of contracts and grants across many universities, and then of course there's sort of the large-scale termination of grant funding at Harvard and Columbia and a few others. So there are many ways to slice into that. I think. Look, the quick answer is that the U.S.'s technical and scientific hegemony, really, its root source is the partnership that John mentioned earlier between the federal government and the universities. Now, you could say the ROI wasn't high enough on that, and reasonable people can disagree about that. But there's just no question that was fundamental to how the U.S. has been in such a leading technological and scientific role. And if you look at sort of the faculty at Stanford or the faculty at Berkeley and you ask how many of them were actually born in another country, or whose parents were born in another country, or who got an education in another country, our ability to pull some of the great international students and talents, the best and the brightest from the world, is a part of that story. So do I expect sort of so-called indirect cost rates to fall? Yes, they will fall. By the way, if I may clarify, just real quick.
Explain to the audience again
Okay.
what indirect costs
Thanks.
are and where they are and where
Thank you.
the administration is
Thank you. So
wanting them
if
to go.
I submit a grant to the National Science Foundation for $1 million worth of direct expense on whatever it is, it could be any field, science connected. And then if I'm a university with a 50% indirect cost rate, or facilities and administration rate is the way people talk about it. Sometimes people use the word overhead. In fact, what happens is that on top of that $1 million direct budget, $500,000 is attached to it. So effectively, the rate of indirect cost is 33%. It's not 50%. A lot of people don't even realize that. That's like the first slice on understanding what's actually going on here. Now, somebody could say 33% is still too high, and many people do say that. But these are the costs. It's sort of like, well, all right, suppose I'm doing mice studies, right? I don't want to have to keep mice alive in my lab. So we have a vivarium that keeps mice alive. And that's a cost to the university, and some of those costs get charged as quote-unquote indirect cost to projects. So anyways, there are lots of facilities and administration elements that really absolutely are essential to doing research. And people can disagree on whether those rates have been too high, but that rate is very likely going down from numbers like 50, 60% calculated, as I said, which is more like 33 to 40%, down to something a good deal lower. And we have to expect that that's going to happen. And that could cut out easily, just that change could cut out $100 million a year from Berkeley's budget.
Jonathan?
Well, I would say there are a number of things that are in Congress right now that would have very significant financial consequences, certainly for us, for many universities. The two biggest being the level and structure of federal funding for science, and then in our case, because we run so significantly on a philanthropic model, the tax on the endowment that's being debated. And came out of the House of Representatives at a very high level, and both of them, I would say, universities were sort of collectively guilty of having done a truly terrible job explaining them to the American public. So there's lots of confusion about the details of how science funding works and or how endowments work and the finances of universities and so forth. And we have to try to rectify that and try to explain it. But to take Stanford as an example, I think one thing that's not really well understood about the funding of research is, at least in our case, for every dollar the federal government puts into research, we put in about 50 cents in philanthropic funding. If you walk around the Stanford campus and you look at the buildings, they have people's names on them, and the federal government didn't pay for those buildings. They're paying for the research that goes on. They also pay to put the lights on. That's the indirect costs, but not for the buildings themselves. And so it's really a co-investment model that's been very, very successful. And the estimates of the ROI on the federal investment are 2, 3, 5x the amount that's put in. And the same with endowments in the sense of it seems like universities are sitting on Fort Knox or something, but in fact, the endowment gets drawn down every year. And last year at Stanford's graduation, 88% of the graduating seniors walked out of that graduation with zero debt. Zero. 4 out of 5 families in the United States, if their kid got into Stanford, would pay zero tuition. And that financial aid is funded by the payout from the endowment. And so if it's taxed at the rate that you're looking at, it'll be much harder to provide that level of financial support for families, mostly almost at the undergraduate level, largely American families that send their kids to Stanford, and the same is true of many of our peer institutions.
So we're talking about potentially, look at these numbers that, billions of dollars that we could lose in NSF grants, NIH grants, endowment tax. What are your contingency plans? Can we fill that federal funds? Can we fill those federal funds through philanthropy, through cutting back? What are your contingency plans? If in fact, probably the worst case scenario is not going to happen, but a likely case scenario on your campuses.
Well, you could think about different models. And if you look at the scientific enterprise in the United States, after World War II, there was a debate about how to fund science in the United States. There was a recognition after World War II that for the U.S. to be the leading country in the world, we had to have the leading science and technology. And there was an argument at the time of how do you do that? Do you locate science in industry, or do you locate it in universities? And the argument that won the day at the time was that you want to locate basic research in universities because there's a broader scope of research. It doesn't have to have a near-term economic return, and because you can have more disciplines, that helps, and you can publish everything openly. In industry, you want to keep things secret, keep it proprietary, build out the business. In universities, we give it all away, and that was a really smart model. It turned out. I mean, that has been the secret of a lot of success. And could it be substituted with industry funding or philanthropy? Some of it could, yes. Some of it could be funded philanthropically, potentially. Some of it could be done with industry, but it would be different because of the economic incentives are different for industries. And there's no way to replace the scale of the federal government, particularly in things like biomedical science. It's just way too big, really. And so, that it would be, I think, yes, we are thinking, of course, about what are possible contingencies, what would be mitigation plans if there's very big changes, what would be radically different models for funding research and science. But it would be very hard to truly, in any near-term time, backfill the federal government's role because it's just so important in scientific discovery and technology.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, all of us are thinking about what happens in this scenario, what happens in that scenario. I think if you said, like the state of California, if the NSF budget gets cut by 50% or whatever proposed, and these so-called indirect cost rates are getting slashed at the same time, might California see its leadership position as needing a California Science Foundation? Look, California already funds science, but might have to raise its game if California really okay, so it's like, who knows whether that will happen, but these are the kinds of ideas that are starting to get kicked around. Industry-sponsored research, it's an important part of what we do, but most industry-sponsored research is pretty close to the marketplace, right? It's not way upstream, and so the question is, how upstream would that source be willing to go? If we thought about foundations, a number of foundations might sort of rejigger some of their priorities to allow more basic research to be funded. So we're thinking about what would the new stack look like, and how do we make it work? A last thing that I'll mention, the post-World War II partnership that we've talked about already is so fundamental. And in 1980, there was another fundamental change. It was called the Bayh-Dole Act, and that allowed universities to basically benefit from the intellectual property that they were creating, having used federal funds. And that created a lot of not just royalties and milestone payments, but also a lot of access to the equity, the nonlinear upside of the companies that are coming out of these universities. I think that the potential for greater nonlinear upside by taking equity positions in values-consistent ways in the companies that are coming out of our universities will be an important engine for fundamental research in the future.
A subject that we're not going to get into this afternoon, but is, we have medical enterprises as well. Hospital, very, important part of Stanford. We have 6 medical centers at the University of California. Depending upon how Medi-Cal, Medicaid changes, Medicare changes in Medicare, that also could be a significant hit to your institution. So that is another, besides the NSF grants and the NIH grants and others, it's tough. But, the principle to the freedom to speak on college campuses, to learn, to discover, is really under assault in many ways. So what are you both doing on your campuses to ensure that those principles of freedom remain intact?
Well, John mentioned it. It's so fundamental to who we are. Let me put it this way. Are Berkeley and Stanford not listening? I promise you we are listening. John would say that. I won't put words in his mouth. But the idea that there needs to be more viewpoint diversity at Berkeley, I'm all in for that idea, okay? And the idea that we really do need more. We have a new course on campus. You would have something similar. It's called Openness to Opposing Views. Can we get every incoming student to take that course? Can we offer it for free? Can we get them to at least listen to the first 3 lectures? Can we? So, the idea that we are just in defense mode and we haven't heard a thing and we've got no getting better to do, that's just not where we are, right? And yet at the same, the premise of your question is, look, I heard a faculty member say to me, it feels like we're going into a world where there are acceptable questions and unacceptable questions. That's anathema to academics. It's sort of like all questions are acceptable. We should be able to research, discover, speak freely, and learn freely. Now, different people can disagree, but this is very fundamental stuff for us, and we have to stick by it.
That deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything Rich just said. About 3 years ago, we introduced a required freshman class at Stanford, which Stanford has a long history of having a required core curriculum, most of which has ended badly in dissent and dispute among the faculty and other people about what would be the canonical works of literature that would be read. And about 3 years ago, we introduced a new freshman curriculum, which is brilliantly designed, actually. I could have spent 100 years trying to do this syllabus without coming up with something as good as the faculty who did it designed. And what's brilliant about it is it's not organized around a canonical set of literature, it's organized around questions. And the first quarter of the question is, what does it mean to live a good life? And how does your education help you do that? In the second quarter, the question is, what does it mean to be a citizen in a democracy? And next year, we're going to debate the third quarter and what that should look like. And that course is it's taught in 16-person sections with a faculty member. And the whole point of that course is to get them to read a very broad range of things. So, for example, in the winter quarter at Stanford, the students read about an episode at Stanford a number of years ago where a federal judge was shouted down at the law school, and our then law school dean, Jenny Martinez, now my provost, wrote an incredible memo, one of the best things that's been written about free speech on campuses in the last couple of decades. They read that. They read about Jay Bhattacharya, who's the current director of the NIH right now, who felt that during COVID he had a hard time with his colleagues, feeling and had a lot of contention, and they read about his experience, and then they debate it, and they argue about it. And this year, I think it was a little slow to have that course take off because coming back from the pandemic, classroom discussion was tough. But this year, I have breakfast or a drink once a week with a group of faculty, sort of randomly selected from across the university, and I happen to have a lot of the instructors from that class, and I would say, basically uniformly, they all said, this is the best year we've had in this class. And the student evaluations also said the same thing. And so actually this has been a big theme about universities in the last several years, that we have not modeled the type of freedom and openness and culture of curiosity and inquiry that are fundamental to campuses. But I'm actually very optimistic that we are turning the corner on this, and we will again be the type of model of open inquiry and discussion and debate that American universities should be.
Thanks for that, John. Can I jump? Thank you for
ahead.
that, John.
Go ahead.
This just popped into my head as you were saying that. Course sounds absolutely fantastic. My youngest just graduated from college, and we were talking about curriculum and where we're going, and she said, what if you could major in a question? That's like what graduate school is. It's a PhD program kind of a thing. And if you heard that, it might be, oh boy, that would be so bespoke. I mean, at the scale Berkeley educates at undergraduates, that's kind of a fun question. But in a world of AI, it's sort of like, that might be feasible for the first time in human history, that we could pull curiosity out of people and develop it and let them go after a question or two as undergraduates. I don't know whether that vision is silly, but I sure do love the question.
I'm going to bring that question to the Board of Regents, Rich, and so we'll talk about that. But you talked about this a little bit, Jonathan, earlier. We all know that public confidence in higher education in America has been declining for many years and reached its lowest point recently. What can we do to prove the worth of your institutions and also to try to strengthen public confidence in higher education in this country?
Yeah, so if you look, for example, at Gallup does polls where they ask questions about, what is your level of trust and confidence in higher education? And that number was 60% a decade ago, and it's fallen to about 30%. By the way, that number that's fallen for many, many institutions in the United States, but higher education is right there with everyone else on the down path. I actually think that the question it needs to be parsed out a little bit. One of the big challenges in higher education is just value. That is, can we deliver high quality education at low enough cost? And there are 6,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and for many of them, that question is basically existential because they have to figure out how to sort of be able to deliver something that people want to pay for. It's a little bit. That's not really the issue that we have because, as I said, we have such generous philanthropy from our alumni that 4 out of 5 American families would pay nothing to come to Stanford. So the value is, we don't have that problem, but that is a big problem for the sector that has to be addressed. I think the big issue for a university like Stanford is we have to do a much better job, but convincing the American people first in the value of the research enterprise. We do 2 things. We do research and education. And we have to convince people in the value of the research enterprise and why it's such a good investment for the country and what the benefits are and how it benefits everyone. And in our education, we have to have our, just as Rich was saying, we have to have our campuses be models for the type of free thinking and inquiry and discussion and debate and breadth of expertise and opinions that people, aspire to have great universities show. And then we have to demonstrate that. And that's a critical task for us in the coming years, both to do it on our campuses and to communicate it effectively to the American people so that they give us the trust and support that we need to thrive in this country.
Here. The idea of parsing the question, I think I parsed it. You're wonderfully synthetic. You use value. I sometimes separate cost from benefit, but that's the two together are value, as you put it.
Business school training.
Cost is very good. But on the benefit side or the practicality side, I think a lot of people. It's really interesting to see a lot of undergraduates, they're majoring in data science, but they're doing a second major in French or classics or sociology or, so the idea that, you can only do a practical thing, I think you'd be surprised at the portfolios of things that students are coming out with. The cost thing is a real important factor. If you look, for example, at the cost, the inflation-adjusted cost to households in California, coming to Berkeley or any UC campus over the last 20 years. It's fallen for households of incomes of $60,000 or less. It's fallen by about a third. It's fallen by a third, okay? It hasn't kept up with inflation, even close to it. And so, we have a lot to be proud of. It doesn't mean, it's inexpensive to go to these campuses, but I think people would be stunned by some of that. And then, the liberalism, we haven't talked about the liberalism, but the liberalism is a concern for a lot of people. And I hope you've heard from us this idea that the marketplace marketplace for ideas needs to be wide open at these universities. On the Berkeley campus, you would have similar, I was giving a talk at your Hoover Institution just last week, and we have something called the Berkeley Liberty Initiative. It's very, very exciting. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's really quite exciting. And so there's a lot of organic energy around making sure that viewpoint diversity is being supported in new ways.
I really appreciate that, you both have talked about how at this time, you take this crisis, which I say it is a crisis, but it's time for us to reflect. There are things that we can do better. So to hear that you're implementing that and talking about it, I think is really, really impressive. So I know I and many of the audience members, I assume, appreciate that as well. You talked about your common background in business. You both have been champions of innovation, of tech transfer. And so I wonder, how has your relationship evolved with the private sector? And do you see more collaboration in the future? It's so important.
Well, thanks. I know time is getting short here, so I'll be quick. But you know,
A minute and 44
there it
seconds,
is,
according to the
43,
clock.
42. You know, one of the things I did mention is this idea of industry-sponsored research. It's been growing a lot, so interacting with industry in ways that work for both sides. I mean, it's like, well, what about the conflict of interest? It's sort of like, we can manage that. We've been managing that for many decades. When you think about the whole startup ecosystem, you know, Stanford and Berkeley are number 1 and number 2 at producing funded new companies. I mean, Stanford's a strong second now, so it's really a quite no, look, these are two absolute.
No competition here on this stage.
So the important point is, look, these are engines of, last point. We have an alum who set up an API, you know, just a way of accessing public databases. And these were Berkeley-founded companies, and every week I get an email from him, here's how much new funding went to Berkeley startups. Here are how many new jobs. It's like a real-time measure, week by week, of the number of jobs and the amount of funding and the new revenue. And it's like, wow, the gauges we can put on the contributions to society from this category have developed a lot.
Final word.
Still processing that second. We're going to go off the stage and we're going to run through the Fortune 500 so we can just count who's ahead. Well, I'll just say, you know, this is the Bay Area Council, and so all of you are involved in our economic ecosystem here in the Bay Area. But you know, we've created something in this area that is something that every area every city region in the world aspires to have, which is we've created an innovation ecosystem that, you know, takes ideas and turns them into services, into products that benefit everyone in the country and create incredible value. And that ecosystem started with the universities in this region. It started with Berkeley and with Stanford, and with the research that takes place on the campuses and the entrepreneurial spirit that gets inculcated in the students who come to the universities. And it's an incredibly special thing. It's a jewel of the country, and you know, we really actually, this is a time when we actually really need your help for the universities to preserve that, both for the region and for the country. And we actually need the business community to help us to make the case that having great science and having great innovation within universities and training students who are going to go on to be great leaders are really valuable and are the seed corn, if you like, of the country's economy and of this region's economy, and of the world's innovation. And so, thank you all for, you know, everything you do, and thank you for having us.
Yeah. Well, I know that you both have lots of allies and friends in this audience, so wonderful to have you here. Rich Lyons, Jonathan Levin, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your leadership of the two greatest universities in the world. Thank you.